name is Zachary Zonizer. For the purposes of this video, you can call me Mr. Z. We're going for sort of a college vibe from now on. That's, I think in my heart of hearts, what I always wanted for this channel. Now you might have a number of questions for me, not the least of which being, where have you been? Why are you dressed like that? What's with the shades? Why is your shot composition so bad? And there are good answers for all of these things, let me assure you, but you're gonna have to ask me that during office hours. Now, your next question might be, why are you here now? Well, a crushing desire and overwhelming need to create things that at least I think are interesting drove me to make something that I can crank out easily with very minimal effort on my part. I'm gonna think of it like a collegiate experience watching anime much more deeply than you might otherwise watch it. I want it to be like when you take English literature and you read a book that you've already read before, but you read it with deeper observation and more intention and thinking about the tone and intentionality of every single word in that story. So, I want to do something that's relevant but also gripping to me, so there is this show called Ranking that I think is quite excellent. So for the purpose of whatever this is, I think I'm going to call this Ranking of Kings. Man, 101 is the easy choice. No, I hate that. Yeah, that's about right. Ranking of Kings, or an introduction to pragmatic empathy. And yeah, there is something about this show that I just think was so gripping. Between the animation, the artwork, the music, all of that bubbles together to build this beautiful atmosphere and these characters that are incredibly rich, and you care about strands of every part of the story because it all bleeds back into this thing that is Ranking of Kings. Ranking of Kings. No. So if you're here, you're probably chasing after an easy humanity credit, and let me assure you, this is just about the easiest humanity credit you will ever receive, because Ranking of Kings is eminently easy to watch. The show starts with a simple supposition. Wait, not supposition. It starts with a simple question. Now, the show, even in the opening for this, offers a lot of its own... Now, the show, even in the opening for this, offers a lot of its own ideas on what a good king could be made of. Is it a person with a strong military? Is it a person who inspires his people? Is it a person who has a lot of money? What is it that makes our kings great historically, and not just great historically, but in their day, what causes some people to lead golden ages and others to lead into recession and destruction? Ranking of Kings, although a fairy tale story taking place in a very fictional universe, I think makes some good insight into that. It has the most to say about individual and personal empathy and understanding of others, but there are interesting observations which occur when you watch this show. But the reason I would recommend you watch this show is because it is a fairy tale which makes you better at consuming other fairy tales. It helps you break down individual components, and my entire philosophy on teaching and learning is that you are always preparing for your next meal. And I think this is a show that can make your teeth sharp and your appetite hearty. So how does the show start? Ranking of Kings starts by this character, Boji. I don't think we learn his name in the opening scene. It doesn't matter, but Boji is crying. He is upset by something, and a very large woman is sort of prodding at his face with her fingers, and she's saying, "Oh, my Boji, there's no reason to be sad. You are stronger than you know." And this is sort of the character arc projected for Boji, the main character. It definitely carries through in moral and meaning and intention for him, who is this character that needs to go on an arc to realize his strength. But one of the things you will realize about the Ranking of Kings world is that everyone is very strong, and everyone essentially has some degree of superpower, one way or another. After we get this flashback of Boji as a child, we see him walking through a town with townsfolk looking and pointing and jeering at him, laughing and making light of him in general ways, but he doesn't seem terribly bothered by it. We're then kicked in with the opening theme song, which is a upbeat, cheery affair. I think if I had to say one thing about the theme song, it would be that it invokes a spirit of exploration. It shows the two main characters going out into the world, and it zooms out on the things we've seen and shows how big just this little part of the world that we've seen so far is, and I think wants to instill in you a desire to consume more of it, to claw out further at this world, and we eventually do as the show goes on. So, but I mean, even in this opening, for this show that has an, let's face it, overall central unifying theme of empathy, you see that this world is mysterious and full of people whose intentions you do not know or understand. So it's trying to get you in a mindset that discovery is out there and it's exciting, but at the same time you need to be cautious because of what you might discover. The opening of the show itself, after the opening credits, after the opening theme song, shows us Boji, and he's sort of poking and prodding at a ladybug. He is remarkably gentle in this way. It's clear that he is not trying to hurt it. He is just sort of observing and exploring the world. This is followed up with him running outside, and he hears some birds in the trees. Or I guess he can't hear them. He must see them, but he's trying to make bird noises back at them. He's trying to communicate with the birds. All this is going to show that he is a gentle and observant boy. All this time, Boji is exploring this town that he lives in. He's going back and forth. It's clear that sociality to him is something at least a little bit important. And then he leaves town. He's just exploring, having a good time, why not? And he encounters someone who he doesn't know. And he's very fascinated, excited by this. It's a new person. It's clear that Boji values something about human interaction, likely because this is a shonen anime, friendship. And here's actually an aside I would like to take for difficulties about anime today. See, there's this problem when you're a creative. Let's say this is a thing you like. Now this is a thing you ate as a kid, and then you lived your life, and then you wanted to go make something like what you did. But you're going to exaggerate the parts you liked and omit the parts you didn't like. So, maybe yours looks a little more like this. Maybe what you liked about that first drawing was the little crosshatch circle there, and this part of it. But then someone who liked this is going to go, and they're going to make something like that, and just so on and so forth until we end up somewhere completely different from where we started. And this isn't a problem. This is just the natural progression of art, right? But if you are trying to look at the meaning and study the intentionality of a piece, but where are you supposed to start studying? From what point of inspiration should I go back? If I'm trying to learn about this piece because I'm someone here trying to make this great work, should I go back to this work? Should I go back to this work? Should I go back to a work I didn't even consider formative? Not just even in art technique, but in culture, in language, in just about everything. There are these infinite strands of cultural technique and idea that are passed from one thing to another, making it very difficult to trace an origin or a meaning or an intentionality behind so many great works of art. And so it is with Ranking of Kings that we have a little bit of baggage to understand. You might have heard me say that because this is a shonen anime, there is friendship involved. And yeah, the power of friendship is a long-running shonen joke, but it's used in Ranking of Kings in a very smart and deeply personal way that isn't really reflective of your Bleaches and your Narutos. I'm sure there's a bunch of people who'd be angry about that, but Ranking of Kings reaches an emotional depth that I did not often feel in, say, Naruto. Feel free to disagree with me, I guess. Maybe you consider it a beautiful piece, but I mean, I must have been crying once an episode with Ranking of Kings. I can't think of even one time Naruto made me cry, or Bleach. Scribe, though. I'm saying all this to say that you go into Ranking of Kings with a little bit of baggage of expectation, almost no matter what. I think that might have been some of the kickback on the show when it first came out. People saw the art style and thought, this is different from what I expect, and I expect Sakuga and animation that looks like this. And Ranking of Kings wasn't really willing to offer that. It has a lot to offer. It has many, many good things to offer, but it's a little off the beaten trail. Not that far. I mean, honestly, in a lot of ways, it's like it's taking steps back and going down even more well-beaten trails. To me, Ranking of Kings resembles a fairy tale far more than it does shonen anime. Anyway, what was I even talking about? Oh, Kage! Okay. So Boji's out and he meets a new person. He meets Kage, who is initially hostile to Boji. Boji disarms him, though, through a couple of things. He's miraculously able to communicate with him, and it's frequently commented upon, but not really ever expounded upon. That's fine, it doesn't matter. Kage is, in essence, like the surrogate for our ears. Kage is here to let Boji explain things, because only Kage can understand Boji without their form of sign language. Man, I lost my train of thought again. Kage! He's disarmed through honesty and kindness. Boji is such a pure and kind soul that Kage cannot help but warm up to him a little just by being around him. It sort of comes across like Kage is just happy to have someone to talk to. Anyway, they come to a sort of agreement that Boji is clearly just going to help out this poor shadow living in the wilderness out of the goodness of his heart. But the way they work this out is that Boji is giving him his fine clothing so that Kage can sell it. This does not sit well with a character we are set up to believe is a villain. At least that's the way I saw it. Queen Hilling, Boji's stepmother, is set up to be an evil Disney stepmom-esque character. She's very clearly in excess of order. She is very hostile in these opening scenes. She even threatens Kage with execution. I think the way she is set up here is incredibly intentional. They want you to think a lot of particular ways about certain characters so that later they can make more sense in hindsight. It's not excessively complicated writing, but it makes these character moments much more enjoyable on a second viewing. It's not coincidental that in this same scene with Queen Hilling acting all grumpy grump, that we learn that Boji can read lips. What we learn here is that Boji is more than meets the eye, and everyone has things going on that others don't notice. It's clear here for Boji, for us, because we've been with Boji this whole time, but had we been with any of these other characters that were in the room in that scene, we could have said the exact same thing about them. They are more than what they seem. Except for maybe that one dude that hid in a barrel. Never mind. So next we learn a little bit about the mighty King Bosk. Now King Bosk was a warrior. He's a warrior king. It's my understanding that he pretty much just built a kingdom around people he had saved. And everybody loved him, and he was the strongest, toughest, rootin' tootin'est king there ever was. But now he's sick, and he's old. So we only learn a couple of things about King Bosk here. We learn much more later. But right here, the things that we learn, he loves Boji. He goes so far as to say that he loves him more than he can bear. And he clearly wants Boji to be the next king. And we learn that this isn't just steam shooting. He's so emotionally serious about this. He is so convinced that it is the right and honorable thing to do because of some choices he'll make later. But I think above all, the thing that has to be illustrated for the rest of King Bossk's character to make sense as the rest of the show goes on is that he loves Boji. He loves him a lot. He doesn't scream about it. He doesn't make grandiose gestures in the same way as other characters, but he loves Boji so much. But the other part about getting introduced to King Bossk as this big, hardcore, beat anybody up kind of guy is that Boji, who is perpetually weak and effectively disabled in a number of ways, not even effectively, literally disabled in a number of ways, Boji is literally disabled, and he cannot hope to live up to this image of what a king is set by King Bossk. He cannot be a 20-foot tall giant wielding a big club. That's not ever who Boji's going to be. After Boji and King Bossk talk a little bit, I think the snake druid shows up and torments Kage a little bit. They have a little scuffle and Kage runs off. That's all sort of blending into this don't trust appearances bit that the show sort of builds over a long period of time. Right now, the important thing to note is that there's a spooky snake druid, and he's chasing our buddy Kage, who's kind of the audience surrogate, kinda. Man, there's gonna be like so many stupid lines that I just ramble off the top of my head that I'm gonna have to take out of this entire video because I'm a fool. Okay, so after the snake druid is tormenting Kage, we get to meet Prince Daida, Boji's younger brother. Now they set this up in sort of a classic 80s movie sibling rivalry kind of way. Like, Daida is the younger brother, but he's eminently talented, and he's taller than Boji, and no one really believes in Boji. So they're setting Daida up, despite being the younger brother, as being the more competent, adult sort of character, the one with more power, more command. But he is shown to be arrogant and full of himself and willing to rush into danger unnecessarily. And I guess I could erase that, but it's still true. I could probably just leave this up all semester. It would never stop being a thing that you need to forget. So, there's this other guy, Domus. He's the king's, one of the king's bodyguards. He's the king's master of sword, which in this universe just means he's real good with a sword. And the king has instructed Domus to train Boji, and seeing this, Prince Daida has come outside and challenged Domus to a fight. Daida is very skilled with the sword, and despite losing to Domus, Domus is so impressed that he immediately thinks and remarks to himself that he wants to train this boy, and seeing this drive in Domus's eyes, Boji challenges Prince Daida to a fight, a sword fight. This is pretty much interpreted by everyone there to be a bad idea. No one thinks Boji can really do it, except for one guy who saw him evading snakes. There's a lot of snake business in this show. It's okay though, snake business, snizness. Yeah, but besides that snizness, everyone thinks Boji's just gonna get beat up if he tries to fight Prince Daida, but what they discover is that despite him not really having the strength to hurt someone much with a sword, he is really good at not getting hit by a sword, and he can dodge it all day, rope-a-dope you, and then give you a little bap. He's pretty good at that, but it's not a strong enough bap to really end a fight. And with that, our first episode ends. We get a storybook-esque ending theme. It's drawn to look like their storybook characters, and it has a sort of somber and sad feeling to it, like the conclusion to a bittersweet story. And with that, that's the end of the first episode of Ranking of Kings. What are the takeaways that I would like you to think about from my perspective while watching this show? Well, I'd like to talk about a thing called... Man, I sure hope that's how you spell borrowed. Is it burrowed? I think it's borrowed. If it's wrong, I'm sure someone will tell me. I'm not much of a... Anyway. The concept of borrowed power, usually talked about in World of Warcraft forum posts, is the idea that a person's power does not emanate from inside of themselves, but instead they are borrowing it from a source that grants them greater power. Some popular fiction characters that use this device would be like Iron Man, arguably Doctor Strange, because he has that little medallion. Anybody that has a magic sword where the majority of their power is contained in the sword and not within themselves. In contrast, internal power would be like a Jedi who, even if they do not have their magic sword, they are still well able to defend themselves. To a certain degree, you could say characters like Mario, or someone whose inherent strengths are above normal but are not presented as strange in any way. And sometimes I think those types of characters are more interesting. I am very strong and fast, but I do not think anything in particular of it. So a lot of times in writing, borrowed power is kind of, I think, lazy. Look, anytime magic is being used, some degree of laziness is being inflicted on your writing, to some degree. But sometimes the ideas or the concepts you want to work with don't fit into reality, so you have to be lazy instead of being exceptionally creative, and you just call it something, and it's magic, and that's the way it works. So, to a certain degree, before I say anything else, yes, all superpowers are a little bit lazy, and that's okay. I'm a very lazy person. You might have noticed because I've not made a video in 10 years. So no, being lazy isn't inherently bad. But there is a propensity, I think, when you're writing stories where your character has borrowed power to artificially endanger them using it. I think we've all been perturbed by instances of borrowed power, at least if you, like me, consume a lot of shows where people have superpowers. So, for instance, Spider-Man having the little web shooters and having a limited amount of webs is something that always bothered me. It's just a limitation on his webs. It never came up unless they needed him to not have webs. So it's like these stopgaps in power, and that's usually how they're used. Borrowed power, literally, in literary examples, I mean, is that it's a way to take power away from your characters when you don't want them to have it anymore. That's definitely what it is in World of Warcraft, for instance. It's our characters need to be able to beat an elder god. They need an old god laser. And now they've killed the elder god, so we gotta take away their old god laser. Ranking of Kings also uses borrowed power, but it uses it in a totally different way, and it uses it for a totally different reason. The choice to make Boji a disabled character speaks to this idea very strongly. Boji does have great and incredible internal reserves of strength and ability, but if you look at what he was able to develop by himself versus what he took from other people, you might come to understand that he had no power to begin with. Everything that makes him strong by the end of the series, he has borrowed. Now, in this first episode, we only see a little flash of this. We saw Boji training with some snakes. We see that a lot of people really love Boji, and especially Boss. Boss really loves Boji, but Boji is very good at winning people over to him. If you can say he has one power, that would be it. He's very good at winning people over to his side, even without words. People just feel his warm intentions and warm up to him. One of the reasons I think the show is so fascinating is it turned on my head the way I think about borrowed power as a literary device. Because the borrowed power in the Ranking of Kings universe is used to tie all of its characters together. They are bound and connected in ways that by the end of the series, there are coordinated lightning strikes being called from the underworld by another guy who's not in the underworld. So in a kind of direct manner of speaking, there's borrowed power on two ways. It's synergy. The power of synergy is maybe a better way to say it. There's a lot of synergy in Ranking of Kings. People are stronger together, and they are stronger when they have empowered one another to act individually. And we're just hitting the surface here. Again, I'm Mr. Z. My office hours are marked on the door outside. Thank you for joining me. We will do a quick introduction section right after this.